At the age of 30, I was ready to resign, and this unrequited love came to an end. It took me 5 years to work my way up from an assistant to Devon's chief secretary, and another 3 years to make him rely on me. Finally, it took me 5 minutes to finish writing my resignation report and 1 second to submit it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. When I handed in my resignation report, Devon stared at me calmly and slowly. Give me a reason. I lowered my head to avoid his gaze and forced a smile as sincere as possible. Mr. Devon, I'm 30 years old this year, and it's time for me to get married. After thinking about it, I added, my boyfriend proposed to me not long ago. In order to resign smoothly, I told an insignificant lie. Devon's fingers tapped on the table, which meant he was extremely irritable. Maybe I should be glad that at least he wasn't completely indifferent to my leaving. After a long time, Devon handed the resignation report back to me and said, I can approve your marriage leave. I hope you can think carefully about resigning. For a moment, I was wavering, and there was a voice in my head that seemed to be bewitching me, saying incessantly, agree, agree, at least you can always see him. Another voice was warning me, Marian, he's going to get engaged. It's immoral to have a crush on a man with a wife. My hands hung in the air for a long time, but I ultimately didn't take it and said, this job is too busy. After getting married, I hope to focus more on my family. I'll hand over all the relevant affairs in my hands. I'm sorry, Mr. Devon. Having said this, Devon didn't say anything more and simply said, I see. Happy wedding. Before I left the office, Devon had already buried himself in his work again. After all, to him, I was just a subordinate, at best the most useful one. That day, I sat at my desk, looking at the potted plant on the table, and was lost in thought for a rare moment. I seldom had time to be in a daze like this. My daily work was very busy. I not only had to coordinate daily work arrangements but also served as Devon's personal assistant. My phone was on standby 24 hours a day. Whenever Devon needed me, I had to rush over immediately, doing the work of several people. Of course, Devon also gave me a high enough annual salary, which allowed me to achieve financial freedom in just a few years. It was only after Jesse called me several times that I came to my senses. Marian, Mr. Devon asked me to tell you to go and make arrangements for the party tonight. Tonight's party was to welcome Patricia, who had just returned from studying abroad, and the people who attended were all from Devon's inner circle. The younger generation of several major families were rich and noble, with extremely high standards. Normally, their circle didn't welcome outsiders, but I was really too useful. There were too few people who could take care of everyone's feelings and preferences and arrange the banquet in an orderly manner without any mistakes. When I arrived at the venue, I immediately set about making arrangements. I gave instructions one by one regarding the dishes, drinks, snacks, and the dietary taboos and preferences of each young master. Take away all the lilies at the banquet. Young master is allergic to them. Make the lights a bit dimmer. Young master has just had eye surgery. Remember to prepare the tea he likes to drink. When the sun had completely set and it was getting dark, people slowly started to arrive. The first one to come in was Egbert. When he saw me, he greeted me. When will Devon arrive? I looked at my watch and replied cautiously. He still has a meeting tonight. I think it'll be about an hour. He slumped on the sofa, looking listless, with dark circles under his eyes and a lot of fatigue. I asked someone to turn down the music and found a blanket to hand to him, saying, it's cold in autumn at night. Don't catch a cold. It'll be a while before the others arrive. You can take a rest. He smiled and took the blanket, saying jokingly, well, seriously, don't you really consider leaving Devon and switching to work for me? I'll give you double the salary. For people like them, there were too many people flattering them, so I seemed particularly special, because I didn't ask anything of them. I got along with them frankly, which instead won me some respect from them. Following his words, I smiled and replied, I'll really keep that in mind. If I have nowhere to go in the future, please take me in, young Master Egbert. As the night grew darker and the street lights came on, the people gradually arrived. Devon was wearing a black overcoat, bringing in a touch of autumn chill. I took the overcoat from his hand, thinking that maybe this was the last time. When the group was enjoying themselves and getting drunk, I found an opportunity to mention that I was planning to leave. I had received everyone's care over the years, So I stood up and toasted everyone, saying, I'm going to leave my job. I didn't know anything before and caused a lot of trouble. Thank you all for your tolerance over the years. In the future, even though the mountains and rivers may be far apart, I hope we still have a chance to meet again. Perhaps it was the bleak autumn scenery that added a sense of parting, and the table was quiet for a while. It was Dave who finally broke the awkward silence by raising his glass and responding to me from a distance. At first, I always thought you had ulterior motives towards Devon. It's only now that I really believe it. Everyone knew what Dave meant. After all, Devon's previous secretaries had all been fired for confessing their love to him. Later, Devon simply only hired male secretaries. Unexpectedly, he was confessed to again, and thus got the title of Heartthrob. Someone patted Devon on the shoulder and said with a laugh, You didn't expect it, did you? There's really someone who can resist your charm. Devon casually lit a cigar and said with a laugh, Get lost. After the meal, several people got together for a card game to pass the time. In the middle of it, Egbert asked casually, Devon, have you met the girl from Christina's family that your grandmother has arranged for you? My heart skipped a beat, and my hand that was pouring water froze in midair. After a while, Devon replied casually, No, as long as my grandmother is happy, it doesn't matter who I marry. The marriages of people like them had always been the result of various interests and considerations. From a certain perspective, it was fair that they had to pay some price for obtaining resources that ordinary people couldn't imagine. It seemed that Devon had also accepted such rules. I had met Sophia once. She was a gentle and charming woman from the south of the Yangtze River. A very nice girl. If possible, I hoped that Devon would have a different ending from others. The dinner party lasted until late at night. The drivers had been waiting outside and picked everyone up in a timely manner after it was over. Only Devon's driver had an accident on the way, so he arrived late. Thus, the situation I least wanted happened. The two of us were alone. We stood side by side under the street lamp, and the light made our shadows very long. Whenever this happened, those feelings of unwillingness and dark thoughts in my heart would become very strong. But Devon didn't know anything. He just stood there quietly, looking less sharp than usual because of the alcohol. Before long, the driver finally arrived. Devon turned his head and looked at me, asking in a gentlemanly manner, Shall we go together? I shook my head and showed a grateful yet distant smile in a timely manner, saying, Thank you, Mr. Devon, but my fiancé is already on the way. Then Devon didn't say anything more. He nodded slightly and bent down to get into the car. Finally, I was alone in the world. The masks I had put on layer by layer during the day could finally be taken off at this moment. I casually kicked off my high heels and sat on the flower bed, feeling a bit dazed for a rare moment. For a moment, I didn't even know where I should go. Before long, it started to rain. It was the first autumn rain after the beginning of autumn, and it felt cold on my body. I walked barefoot along the road. This was a wealthy area, and it took me a long time to find a place to hail a taxi. The road I usually took was under repair tonight, and the driver didn't know about it, so he had to turn around and drive out again. Devon didn't expect to see Marion again, waiting by the side of the road in the rain, swinging a shoe in one hand. He was a bit surprised. He didn't expect that the always dignified and strict Secretary Marion would have such an, casual side. After all, in the company in the past, whenever he saw her, she was always dressed in a neat suit with the buttons of her shirt fastened to the top. He had seen many women unbutton their buttons and lean over in front of him on purpose. But Secretary Marion was an exception. That's why he valued her. On the one hand, it was because of her professionalism, and on the other hand, it was because she knew her place. When the car was about to pass her, the driver in the front asked, Shall we give Secretary Marion a ride? Devon's expression remained calm as he simply replied, No need. He had a bad impression of her fiancé. Secretary Marion was a smart person, but now it seemed that she didn't have good judgment in choosing a partner. However, feelings were like drinking water. Only the person involved knew whether it was cold or warm. He didn't want to interfere too much. I'm not sure if I saw Devon's car. It just flashed by. Maybe I was wrong. There were probably few people like me taking a taxi in the wealthy area. The driver was coming from a long way away. I had to stand until my legs were numb before I finally waited for my car. It was already 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when I got home, and the whole house was silent. Outside, I told everyone that I had a happy family. a fiancé who loved me, and many friends. Everyone often looked at me enviously and said that life like this was perfect enough. But in fact, I had nothing. I had no relatives, no lover, and no friends. In junior high school, my mother got breast cancer. At the middle and late stages, after having her breast removed, it recurred within half a year. One ordinary morning, my father went to work but never came back. He took away all the money in the family, leaving my sick mother and me, a minor. After learning this news, my mother was surprisingly calm. She silently underwent chemotherapy and was hospitalized. Occasionally, when she was in good condition, she would cook for me. One evening when I came home from school, my mother had prepared a table of dishes and was sitting across from me, looking at me with a smile. For some reason, I felt an inexplicable fear. The food on the table had a strange smell when I brought it close to my nose. I thought of the bottle of rat poison my mother had just bought in the bathroom. That day, I realized for the first time that my mother was so strong that I couldn't break free. Driven by a strong will to survive, I managed to break free from her hand when she wasn't prepared. I ran away in a hurry and somehow ended up on the rooftop. My mother was crying and holding out her arms to me, saying incoherently, "My dear, the world is so bad. Mom doesn't feel at ease leaving you alone here. Come with Mom. We'll still be mother and daughter in the next life." I also cried. I was so tired and missed the smell of laundry detergent on my mother. I thought, forget it. There's nothing good about being alive anyway. The wind on the rooftop was so strong that night, but my mother's embrace was so warm. My mother held my hand and walked step by step towards the edge. At the moment when we were about to fall, I was grabbed by a pair of thin but strong hands. He held on to me tightly, no matter how much I struggled. When I was dangling in the wind, I could only see a pair of amazingly bright eyes. Later, I survived, but my mother died. That person was Devin. He not only saved me but also gave me a reason to live. To repay his kindness, I felt that I had betrayed my mother. At that time, I was like a person about to drown, eager to grab a floating log, and Devin was that log. Later, the fire engines, police cars, and ambulances all arrived. In the crowd, I grabbed his hand and looked up at him, asking, "How can I repay you?" I still remember that 16-year-old Devin looked down at me and told me seriously, "Then remember to come to me." My life seemed to be trapped on the night my mother died, and Devin was the only hope. That night, as usual, I was swallowed up by dreams, which were all about the past. I saw my mother at the end asking me why I didn't go with her, and I also saw the silent look in my father's eyes before he left home. When I woke up from the dream, sweating profusely, I found that I couldn't speak. I took my temperature and it was 38.8 degrees Celsius. According to my usual temperament, I would probably just take an antipyretic pill and then go to work as if nothing had happened. But this time, I took a rare leave. I needed some time to think about my future path. When Devin arrived at the company, he found that Secretary Marion was absent. After asking, he found out that she was on sick leave. He frowned, and his impression of her so-called fiancé was completely ruined. Secretary Assistant Jesse temporarily took over Marion's work and brought him a cup of coffee. Devin took a slow sip, his expression unchanged. There was one more piece of sugar in it. He didn't say anything and just took a sip and then didn't drink anymore. There was a mistake in the preparation of the meeting materials in the morning. Fortunately, he already knew the key points of this negotiation, so nothing major happened. The temperature in the office was 1 degree lower. The humidifier wasn't turned on, and his throat was a bit dry. At the end of the day, it was hard to say what was wrong, but everything just felt inappropriate. Devin thought of Marion for the first time. He rarely thought of her because she seemed to have no presence at all. Marion's thoughtfulness was like spring breeze and rain, silently nourishing everything. You couldn't feel her presence, but everything was just right. He frowned. This was the second time he had frowned today, because of Marion's unlucky fiancé who had taken away his chief secretary. I lay in bed for a day, thinking for a whole day, but still didn't know where to go. I was like a ship lost in the ocean, unable to tell east from west, north from south. So the next morning, I went to work as usual. When I arrived at the office, Jesse looked at me cautiously and whispered, "Mr. Devin doesn't seem to be in a good mood. He only took one sip of the coffee yesterday morning." The coffee from last night was still on the table. I dipped my finger into it, took a sip, and then gave instructions. 1 extra piece of sugar was added. It should be 3 cubes of sugar. It can't be 1 more or 1 less. I carefully demonstrated how to make the coffee again, and Jessie watched closely. When the coffee was brewed, Devin arrived at the company. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but the corners of his lips seemed to turn up a bit more than usual when he looked at me, and there was a hint of resentment in his eyes. Handing over the work was more troublesome than I had expected. I held too many responsibilities, and it wasn't easy to transfer everything all at once. Moreover, Devin was never an easy person to serve. I had to carefully instruct on all matters, big and small, in his daily life. So I simply took a notebook and wrote down everything that came to mind, from trivial matters to important ones. Due to this delay, the work that was originally planned to be handed over in a month had to be postponed, and I ended up having to do the thing I least wanted to do. I had to pick up Sophia at the airport and take her to the old residence. I had improper feelings for Devin. Although I hadn't done anything, I still felt a bit guilty when I met the person involved. Sophia was wearing a pale moon-white cheongsam, with a piece of emerald green jade hanging around her neck. It was obvious at a glance that it was of great value. Her hair was coiled up with a hairpin, and she had an air of nobility that made her stand out in the crowd. I smiled and stepped forward, saying, "Miss Sophia, Mr. Devin asked me to pick you up." On the way, Sophia asked me some questions about Devin. It was inevitable to feel nervous about getting married to someone she had only met a few times. I could see the unease in her heart, so I comforted her gently. "Mr. Devin is a very good person. Miss Sophia, don't worry. If you have anything, you can come to me at any time." Hearing this, she looked up at me gratefully. We chatted all the way to the old residence. I was originally going to leave after taking her there, but Grandpa Luke stopped me. He was known for his iron-fisted methods in the business world in the early years. Now in his 70s, he was still full of energy, especially with his sharp eyes. "Marion, where is Devin?" Had Devin not arrived at the old residence? Keeping my expression unchanged, I replied cautiously, "There are a lot of things going on at the company today. Mr. Devin might be a bit late." Grandpa Lou snorted coldly and, out of mercy, asked me to bring Devin back. I had witnessed with my own eyes Grandpa Lou punishing Devin with the family law. He had received 6 lashes with a whip, leaving countless bloodstains. There were still marks on Devin's back. After leaving the door, I quickly dialed Devin's phone number. Thank goodness, on the 3rd try, he finally answered the phone. I asked him in a hurry where he was, but he didn't answer. After a long while, he called my name, "Marion." His tone was confused, as if he had been drinking, and there was a strong sound of the sea breeze in my ear. I thought I knew where he was. When I rushed there in a hurry, I saw Devin leaning against the reef by the shore. There were several cans of white liquor sold in the supermarket beside him, and his hair was disheveled in the night wind. Hearing the commotion, he looked up at me. There seemed to be a layer of mist in his eyes, but they were still sharp, as if he was drunk and yet not drunk. "You're here. Wait a moment. I'll be ready soon." Devin gently patted the spot beside him, motioning for me to come over. "Let's talk." The Liu family mansion was located not far from the cliff by the sea. At night, it was brightly lit, and yet it still retained its ancient charm due to its design of pavilions and terraces. Devin suddenly asked, "Is it beautiful?" My eyes were still fixed on his handsome jawline, and I subconsciously replied, "Yes, it is." My face turned bright red all of a sudden. Fortunately, he didn't notice. He just continued, "But in fact, it's a tomb inside. What's the use of having a mansion made of white jade and golden horses? All that's buried inside are countless skeletons." He said this with a smile, but there was seriousness in his words. It was rumored that the Liu family's fortune-making was not clean, involving some gray areas, and they had been in the process of transformation in recent years. I had been with him for 7 years and had watched how he gradually took control of the power of Devin's group. There had been so many turbulent events, open and hidden attacks, which were not something to be told to outsiders. So was he also tired? I thought this and asked, "Are you happy?" The words, "happy," lingered on his tongue for a moment. He suddenly smiled but didn't answer my question. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Your fiancé is not good enough." I was taken aback, but he didn't say anything more. He just nodded and apologized. "Sorry, I overstepped the line." After Devin finished the last sip of the wine in his hand, he stood up. In an instant, he was once again the extremely noble Mr. Devin. On the way home, I kept thinking about what Devon's words meant. I thought about it for a long time but couldn't come up with an answer. Just like I had never been able to figure out why he had appeared alone on the rooftop of that dilapidated building more than 10 years ago. But it didn't matter to me anymore because I was going to resign. From then on, the mountains and rivers would be far apart, and I was afraid we would never see each other again. The day I resigned was a rainy day. The rain in the south was always like this, fine and dense, pattering on as if it would never end. I sat at my desk, silently packing my things. I had been in this position for nearly 10 years. From a young woman in her early 20s who knew nothing to someone who could now handle things independently. I knew that at 9 o'clock every morning, the sunlight would slant onto the pot of cactus I had planted. I also knew that as long as I quietly stood on tiptoe, I could see the outline of Devon through the gap. I had been living in this world, staggering along, relying on these things. But now I was leaving. I had repaid the favor of saving my life for 8 years. In the remaining years, it was time for Sophia to accompany him. Jessie looked at me with tears in her eyes. I wiped away her tears and smiled, saying, "Silly girl, it's not like we'll never see each other again." But in my heart, I knew that we wouldn't see each other again. This city had left me with too much pain, so it was time for me to leave. When I turned to leave, I still felt a bit regretful. I was regretful that I had deliberately delayed for so long. But I still hadn't seen Devon one last time. After resigning, I slept at home for a long time, as if making up for all the sleep I had missed over the years. I also bought some wine and turned the TV volume up to the maximum. A comedy was playing on the TV. I laughed loudly, like a fool. After laughing, I sat on the floor in a daze, looking at the dark surroundings, feeling lost and at a loss. When I was a child, my biggest wish was to study hard. As long as I got good grades, my parents wouldn't quarrel. Later, after my father left, my wish was to earn a lot of money so that my mother could live. After my mother died, my wish was to become Devon's most capable assistant. If he was happy, I would be happy too. But now I suddenly didn't know where to go. While I was in a daze, the doorbell suddenly rang. I looked through the peephole and was shocked to find that it was Devon. In a hurry, I opened the door and suddenly realized that I was still wearing a pink bunny pajamas. It was too late to close the door, so I had to invite him in with a forced smile, trying to put on a professional look. Compared to my nervousness, Devon seemed calm. He explained, "I called you. This document is too urgent today, and I couldn't find the prepared draft for a while. I just happened to be driving nearby." The flush on my face disappeared in an instant, and I quickly put on that professional smile again. "Okay, Mr. Devon, please have a seat. I need to look for it." While I was searching for the document, Devon sat on the sofa. His good manners kept him from looking around randomly, so he just stared at me. This made me feel extremely uncomfortable. The more flustered I was, the more I couldn't find it. Devon smiled and comforted me. "Take your time." Then he asked, "Doesn't your fiancé live here?" "Secretary Marion." I subconsciously told a lie. "He'll be back at night." It took me half an hour to finally sort out all the required documents, print them out, and hand them to Devon. Devon took the documents and, for some reason, suddenly stared at me intently, making me feel uneasy. Just as I was about to speak, he suddenly smiled. It was still that kind of smile that made people feel like they were in a spring breeze but also had a sense of distance. "I'm getting married soon, and I really can't find a suitable person to be in charge. I wonder if Secretary Marion could do me a favor. I'll pay the salary as usual." I didn't have the experience of refusing Devon. My body gave the answer before my mind did. I nodded inexplicably, and then looked at the man in front of me with a faint smile. The words that were on the tip of my tongue somehow got swallowed back down. After that day, I went back to Devon's side and was in charge of his engagement ceremony. I thought maybe it was for the best. Only by seeing him get married with my own eyes could I truly give up. Because I felt guilty towards Sophia, I took care of everything myself, hoping that she could have a perfect engagement ceremony. However, I didn't know what Devon was busy with during this period. He rarely came over, and whenever there was something, he only contacted me, and then I would convey his requirements. It was as if this wasn't his engagement banquet but someone else's. Sophia's expression became more and more desolate day by day. When she was trying on the wedding dress that day, she looked at me pleadingly. "Secretary Marion, please ask him if he's coming today." According to my professional ethics, I shouldn't have made this call. but I did it anyway. When the phone was connected, Devin's voice came through. Hello. The background was very noisy, and Devin's voice was a bit hoarse from drinking. He was at a drinking party. I originally wanted to hang up the phone, but then I remembered Sophia's sad expression. I carefully considered my words and said, "The wedding dress arrived today. Are you coming to the old residence?" There was no sound from the other side for a long time. Just as I was about to apologize for overstepping, Devin spoke. "Sure, come and pick me up." I didn't know why he asked me to pick him up, but I did as he said. When I arrived in a hurry, the drinking party had already ended, and only Devin was lying on the sofa, half drunk. I squatted down halfway and gently patted him, calling, "Mr. Devin, Mr. Devin." He suddenly raised his head and stared straight at me. His eyes were as sharp as blades, and I was a bit stunned, but in just a second, his eyes quickly returned to that hazy look surrounded by the smell of alcohol, as if what I had just seen was just an illusion. I helped him up and staggered to the car. As soon as we got in the car, he fell asleep. Through the rearview mirror, I could just see his face. I rarely had the opportunity to look at him openly, so I couldn't help but take a few more glances. The guilt towards Sophia in my heart deepened a bit more. I withdrew my gaze and recited the pure heart mantra several times. Somehow, I suddenly felt an ominous unease in my heart. I had always trusted my intuition very much, and my mind quickly started to work. Something was wrong. There was a black SUV that had been following me all the time. It had been half an hour since just now. "Mr. Devin, Mr. Devin." I tried to wake Devin up, but the person in the back seat remained motionless. There was no other way, so I could only accelerate. The car behind also started to accelerate. The two cars were speeding on the coastal highway. It was obvious that the car behind had been modified. No matter how much I accelerated, it still followed me with ease. In the end, I could only watch as it crashed into me and then drove away. With a bang, the car was hit and rolled over. Fortunately, I turned the steering wheel at the last moment, so we didn't directly fall into the sea. There was a cloud of blood in front of my eyes, and my head was extremely dizzy. I struggled to crawl out from the gap in the seat. Devin was pressed behind the car seat and finally opened his eyes at this moment. He tried to save himself, but he was pinned down by the car frame. I found a crowbar in the trunk of the car and, using all kinds of physical knowledge, tried to pry open the car door, but the door remained firmly shut. The fuel tank had tipped over, and the oil was constantly spreading. There was a faint smell of smoke and fire in the back seat. The more urgent the situation was, the clearer my mind became. Useless emotions such as fear and panic were all pushed aside by me. The only thought in my mind was to save Devin. The flames continued to spread, and the car was at risk of exploding at any moment. Devin looked up at me and said, "The salary I paid you isn't enough for you to risk your life to save me. Secretary Marion, you should leave. The car is about to explode." I was already annoyed, and Devin kept talking. I interrupted him angrily. "Shut up." Devin suddenly laughed for some unknown reason. I didn't have time to figure out the meaning of his laugh. The flames were still spreading. I didn't know when I had cut a gash on my hand, and drops of blood fell to the ground. I used up my last bit of strength and finally managed to get Devin out of the car. Then I helped him and walked out with some difficulty, step by step. Not long after Devin and I left, the car exploded. It was a bright red, and it lit up the entire night sky. I was glad that I hadn't been brainwashed by the aesthetic of being thin, white, and young. I was strong enough and had enough endurance to save both Devin and myself. The sound of an ambulance came from a distance. The belated fatigue overwhelmed me, and everything went black in front of my eyes. Devin woke up earlier than Marion. At the last moment when the car was hit, Secretary Marion had turned the steering wheel towards herself. He sat beside Marion and seemed to take a good look at the woman in front of him for the first time. Devin had been abandoned by many people when he was a child. Once he and his father were kidnapped, and only one person could get on the boat, so he was abandoned. No matter how much he cried or shouted, he could only watch as the boat gradually drifted away. His mother had also promised him that she would never leave him, but she still ended her own life with a rope. Many people had entered his life and then left him without hesitation. He had always been the one to be abandoned, and the woman in front of him had every reason to abandon him. But she didn't. He had always prided himself on being able to see through people's hearts. But this time he didn't know what the woman in front of him wanted. What did she want? He wondered. It was as if he had had a strange and fantastical dream. When he woke up, Devin was looking at me thoughtfully. My heart sank suddenly. Had Devin seen through my improper feelings for him? Devin looked at me quietly. Our eyes met, and my palms kept sweating. It was as if I was waiting for a judgment. Why did you save me? My mind raced in an instant, and the next second I smiled and replied, Mr. Devin, I'm a gambler. The favor of saving the life of the president of a group isn't an opportunity that everyone can get. Devin frowned and examined me calmly and deeply, as if assessing the credibility of my words. What do you want? The principle that people of his class adhered to was that those who seemed to want nothing actually wanted the most, and an exchange of interests was the most reassuring. I carefully considered what I could ask for that would be worth risking my life for. A request that would be reassuring enough for Devin. I want 1% of the shares of your group to ensure a lifetime of comfort for myself. The frown on Devin's face relaxed. I knew I had made the right move. He smiled and said, shares are such an unreliable thing. It would be better to have a storefront in a prosperous area. What do you think, Secretary Marion? I also smiled. A storefront worth tens of millions. Then thank you, Mr. Devin. We each got what we wanted, and Devin didn't have to feel guilty towards me. So he stood up and said indifferently, then Secretary Marion, have a good rest. You don't have to worry about the engagement anymore. I stayed in the hospital for a whole week. The day I was discharged from the hospital was also the great day of Devin's engagement. My phone was filled with reports about the marriage alliance between their families. The venue decorated with roses was like a dream. It was all for the best. From then on, we would go our separate ways. I had repaid what I owed and received what I deserved. But why did I still feel a bit sad? I was walking aimlessly on the street alone and, by chance, ended up at a bar. Over the years, I had usually been the one to clean up after everyone, so I rarely drank and didn't like it either. They said that getting drunk could relieve all sorrows, but the wine was really bitter. It was so bitter that tears fell from my eyes and dropped into the wine, mixing into a liquid that was both bitter and salty. Before I lost consciousness, I placed an order for a delivery person and asked him to send me home safely. At the engagement banquet, Devin received a phone call. It wasn't the call he had arranged in advance, but a call from Secretary Marion. However, it didn't matter. He just needed an excuse to leave the engagement banquet, and the reason didn't matter. After driving to the bar, the young man in a blue vest hurried forward to greet him. She asked me to send her home, but she didn't tell me where her home was. I had no choice but to call the number at the top of her contacts. He looked at Devin and said somewhat fearfully, aren't you her boss? She won't give me a bad review when she wakes up tomorrow, will she? Devin took Secretary Marion from his hand and comforted the injured young man. Don't worry, she won't. Just leave the rest to me. He helped Marion out. The woman in his arms was not at all quiet. She poked his face for a while and then pulled his hair. She seemed to be really drunk. They said that people spoke their true feelings after drinking. Devin wanted to test her. What did you come to me for? The woman frowned as if thinking, and then she smiled foolishly. To repay a favor. Devin frowned again. What favor are you repaying? The favor of saving my life. Devin asked again. Then how do you plan to repay this favor? Give him all the best things in the world. Why do you want to give him all the best things in the world? Because I love him. Devin had taken an elective course in interrogation in college. The key point was to follow the other person's logic and go deeper step by step, and then lead the other person to the questions he wanted to ask. He had originally thought he could find out something, but he didn't expect to get such an answer. She loved him. Secretary Marion loved him. Devin looked at Marion over and over again. She was smiling stupidly and was very drunk. She didn't seem to be pretending. Many people had said they loved him, and he had seen many different kinds of love, some intense, some like a gentle stream, but this was the first time he had seen this kind of love, a love that had been hidden in the bottom of her heart for years and was known to no one. Some things that couldn't be explained were now explained. Why were there no men's things at Secretary Marion's home? Devin wondered. Could he believe her? Just because of love. She didn't care about life or death. The next day, I woke up with a splitting headache from the hangover. I vaguely remembered having a dream last night. The only thing I was clear about was Devin's dark and deep eyes. Why did I dream of him again? Dreaming of someone else's husband was immoral, I thought. For a long time, I forced myself not to pay attention to the news about Devin's group. I traveled far and wide, got off the train at a random place, and then wandered aimlessly in different cities. I personally visited some people, evaluated the specific situation, and then made donations according to different levels. Sometimes I often thought that maybe my mother had wanted to live. If someone had helped me at that time, would everything have been different? There were too many unfortunate people in this world, and I could only help those I could see with my own eyes. The next time I heard news about Devon, it was the news that Devon's group had gone bankrupt. The photo of Devon and Sophia on the cover was artificially divided into two halves, with a few big red characters written, "The marriage alliance failed. Where will Devon's group go?" I was worried and called Sophia. There seemed to be a hint of guilt in her tone, but in the end, she just sighed. "Secretary Marion, you should know that I never married a person but a family. There's nothing I can do." After the initial panic, my brain began to calm down. The more I thought about it, the more something seemed wrong. I suddenly realized that perhaps all of this was done by Devon. Over the years, Devon's group had seemed prosperous, involved in various industries, but it had become too big to manage. Beneath its prosperity, there were full of crises. I had tried to remind Devon, but he had casually brushed me off. I had thought he had other plans, but it turned out that he had had this idea from the very beginning. I suddenly remembered how he had looked when he was drunk that day. It turned out that the Liu family was just a cage to him. I suddenly felt that there should be someone by his side at this moment. Just like when my mother was pulling me to jump off the building, Devon had held my hand firmly. No matter who that person was, as long as they held his hand. Thinking of this, I rushed to the company regardless of everything. The company, which had originally been brightly lit, was now mostly dim. The last bit of funds of the company had all been used for compensating the employees. I walked through the layers of workstations, pushed open the door. Devon was enveloped in shadows, and the wind in the capital city made the blinds rattle. He looked up at me, his eyes dim, and I didn't know what he was thinking. I stepped forward and held his hand. I had thought of countless ways to speak before coming, but at that moment, I couldn't remember anything. At that moment, all I knew was that I had to hold his hand, just like he had held mine many years ago. He thought of his mother again. The poor girl who had married into a wealthy family had finally become a shameful madwoman in the family. People had tried to shape a wild child into a qualified mistress of a big family with all kinds of rules. She had to be hypocritical, calm, and restrained, and know how to make choices. Everyone had added fuel to the fire on the path of driving his mother crazy. Later, people said she didn't have the good fortune to bear such a heavy responsibility. But what if the rules were wrong from the beginning? Devon's group had still been running some illegal businesses secretly. His mother had seen some things and couldn't bear it. She couldn't bear to eat people, so people ate her. Devon had originally planned to face everything alone and let all the sins return to dust. But Marion had come. Was it because of love? When Marion first came, he had seen her, when everyone was busy packing up and leaving. She had walked towards him against the flow of people, through the mess on the ground. It was like a knight coming to protect her princess. Devon suddenly smiled at the thought. How could there be such a big fool in the world? She stepped forward without saying a word and held his hand. Heat was continuously transmitted to him from her palm. It was only at this moment that Devon realized how cold his hand was. So he held her hand back. The wind blew and the rain swayed, but only her warmth was real. I accompanied Devon to carry out the final liquidation of Devon's group. Devon had an interview with the media, and some indignant people threw eggs at him. Devon's group owed a huge debt of blood to many people. The anger of the masses needed an outlet, and this was what it should repay. On the day Devon's group officially announced its bankruptcy, Grandpa Liu had a cerebral infarction and was admitted to the hospital. Devon asked me to drink with him. When we arrived at the place, I found that it was his home in the city center. I stood at the door, feeling a bit awkward. This isn't very appropriate, is it? I wanted to say that it seemed we weren't in a relationship where we could drink together, and this would make me have the thought of overstepping. Devon lowered his eyes, looking a bit desolate. There seemed to be a hint of choking in his tone. Was he crying? I thought that no matter what, it was his grandfather, and my heart was suddenly gripped with pain. I took the wine bottle, and I saw his eyes light up a bit. Well, I might as well accompany him. It was just a matter of enduring a bit more. Wasn't endurance what I was best at? I had never seen Devon like this before. His shirt and tie were scattered. His suit was full of wrinkles, and he looked dejected and vulnerable, as if he was going to melt into the night. He always seemed like a person from the sky. Whenever he appeared, he was always surrounded by people, and every move of his exuded nobility. But now, it was like a person from the sky had suddenly landed on the ground. In a drunken haze, Devon kept calling my name and asking me to respond. After getting drunk, Devon's voice was a bit hoarse. It hit my eardrums, and each sound seemed to hit my heart. He suddenly leaned close to me. The distance between us was only an inch or so. I could see the light hitting his eyelashes and casting dense and sparse shadows. "Secretary Marion, will you always be here?" I didn't answer. After all, no one would always be by someone else's side. Besides, in what capacity could I always be by his side? But he kept asking persistently, as if he wouldn't give up until he got an answer. Finally, I could only answer helplessly, "Yes, I will always be here." Satisfied with the answer, Devon stopped for a while and frowned at me, not knowing what he was thinking. Then, for some reason, he suddenly said he was hot and forcefully tore off 2 buttons of his shirt, exuding a faint allure. I had never thought that such a word could be associated with Devon one day. I was stunned for a moment and forced myself to shift my gaze. I didn't know why. Although he kept saying he was hot, he kept leaning towards me. I felt my face burning hot. I thought that this winter was really hot. Using my last bit of self-control, I created some distance between Devon and myself. He looked at me inexplicably, and then started drinking again. Finally, he drank himself into a state of unconsciousness. In the last moment before fainting, he looked at me for a long time, and there was a look of encouragement in his eyes. Why was it encouragement? After settling Devon down, I went home and thought about it all night but couldn't figure out why it was encouragement. The next day, Devon called and specifically thanked me for taking good care of him. I smiled a bit shyly and said politely, "It's all I should do, Mr. Devon." There was a pause on the other end of the phone for a few seconds, and then Devon gritted his teeth and called my name. "Marion, you really are." He didn't tell me what I really was, and the phone was hung up, leaving me confused. Devon's group was gone, and it seemed that there was no reason for me and Devon to meet anymore. It had been several days since I last saw him. When I saw him again, he knocked on my door, drunk. The moment I opened the door, he fell into my arms. I used all my strength to help him onto the sofa. When I got up and wanted to leave, he grabbed me. I lost my balance and fell into his arms. We were so close to each other. He looked at me seriously and called me softly, "Marion." At this moment, there was only me in his eyes, and my heart suddenly started pounding uncontrollably. Closer and closer, slowly approaching, and finally, everything after that was in a mess, all out of control. The self-restraint I thought I had was burned to ashes. The next day, when I woke up, I ran away like a coward. Halfway through running, I suddenly remembered that this was my home. I stayed outside until it was almost dark and then carefully pushed open the door. The light suddenly came on. Devon hadn't left yet. He looked up at me with a half smile and said, "What? Don't you want to take responsibility?" I stood there, feeling a bit awkward. "Let's talk." I originally wanted to persuade him not to take what happened last night to heart. It was normal for men and women to be drunk and infatuated for a moment. There was a hint of helplessness between his eyebrows and eyes, and he stopped me. "You can't say anything nice, so listen to me first." Devon's expression was very serious. He wasn't this serious even on the day Devon's group went bankrupt, which made me nervous too. "Marion, you think too highly of me. In fact, I'm just an ordinary person. I have all the greed, evil, anger, and hatred that ordinary people have." I shook my head and wanted to say no, but he had already continued. Agree. At least you can always see him. But I'm afraid that if I give you time and you see clearly what kind of person I am, you won't like me anymore. Whether your feelings for me are gratitude, respect, or admiration. You took the initiative to provoke me. There's no reason to run away after provoking me. Devon took out a ring from somewhere and looked at me intently. "So, Marion, would you like to marry me?" My mind was in a complete mess. I nodded somehow, and the ring was put on my finger. "Do you have your ID card?" I nodded subconsciously. Devon smiled at me. "Then let's go." "Where are we going?" "To get the marriage certificate." We became the last couple to get married at the Civil Affairs Bureau today. When we came out, it was dusk. The setting sun was gorgeous, and it dyed half of the sky red. From then on, all my delusions and unwillingness had finally come to an end. The end.